To try and answer my own question in this episode, is Jerusalem also Armenian? Let me first go back to the 1990s, some 3+ decades ago, when Israelis and Palestinians were negotiating for the rebirth of a sovereign and contiguous Palestinian state next to Israel via the mechanism of the Oslo chapter. One of the sticking points during the skewed negotiations centered on the future of Jerusalem, and more particularly on the old city of Jerusalem. And for those who aren't familiar with Jerusalem, the old city is almost 1 square kilometer and home to the three monotheistic traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. You cannot miss its bustling reality in East Jerusalem, even if you have no clue of its religious historicity, since it often teems with Jews, Christians, and Muslims in its four uneven quarters: the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter that house also the Western Wall, the Dome of the Rock, and the Church of the Resurrection. And by the way, the old city has 8 gates, and all but one, the Gate of Mercy or Bab el-Rahmeh, still serve Jerusalem residents and visitors streaming across its alleyways, markets, or sacred and historic sites. But back to the much maligned Oslo process. A major problem here was that both Israeli and Palestinian negotiators were trying to agree on the control of the old city following a peace deal. It was speculated that the rough script Prime Minister Barak and Chairman Arafat took to President Clinton at Camp David in July 2000 suggested that Palestinians would have de facto control of the Muslim and Christian quarters, whilst Israelis would retain de facto and de jure control of the Armenian and Jewish quarters. When I found out about this so-called deal as a second-track negotiator on behalf of the churches of Jerusalem, I met with the leaders of the historic churches and subsequently drafted a letter to the Camp David summiteers in which all of them, including the Armenian Patriarch, endorsed their refusal of this jigsaw solution. They wanted the Armenian quarter to remain squarely on the Palestinian side alongside the Muslim and Christian quarters. But why, you might well ask? After all, Armenians are ethnically non-Arabs. The answer for me was clear. This partition couldn't work in a practical sense in this tiny place where residents cross almost unconsciously from one quarter to another for work, habitation, or social activities. It would have been an administrative as well as political nightmare. But there was another reason too. Some Armenian commentators claim that Armenians in Palestine are outside this conflict and are an autonomous, almost exogenous demographic oblast living on this patch of land. The claim goes that they are neither pro-Israel nor pro-Palestine. I'd refute this viewpoint by repeating my mantra that this community is indeed Armenian ethnically, and they're also Christian religiously, but they are in their majority culturally and politically Palestinian. In other words, ask Armenians whether they support Palestine or Israel in this bloody political conflict over land, and I repeat, it is over land, and the overwhelming majority would support Palestine. Israel knows this full well too, and treats them in the same shabby manner it treats other non-Jewish communities. Anyway, the Oslo process is history now, so let me fast forward. Indeed, after a hiatus of well over 2 decades, Armenians in Jerusalem almost literally woke up one morning with another problem. They learned that some 25% of their property had been leased out to an Australian Jewish developer for 99 years, so he tart up the neighborhood and built a big hotel too. This whole deal was a sham because Armenian church authorities did not have the right to negotiate away this land without the approval of the proper ecclesiastical instances. As a consequence, the community came together to protest against this actus reus and to protect the Armenian quarter. The standoff became even more urgent when it was leaked that the lessee of this property was allegedly representing an Israeli ultra-right-wing settler movement that strives to rid Jerusalem of its non-Jewish inhabitants. So the Armenian community took physical measures to protect their land and used social media to promote their cause, whilst also requesting the High Court in Jerusalem to rescind the agreement. To date, I believe that the court has not rendered its judgment. But a few days ago, Israel upped the stakes when its Jerusalem municipality stated that it'll seize Armenian properties if the Patriarchate were unable to pay to the council all the local debts it had accrued over the years. This is a colossal amount that the Armenian Church can ill afford to pay. So what is the alternative? Agree to cede its properties? This request by the municipality is not a new pressure point, since it happened also when I was in Jerusalem and when Israeli officials exerted this same pressure on the three patriarchates, Greek Orthodox, Latin Rite Catholic, and Armenians, to cough up enormous amounts of shekels that Israeli officials deemed to be putative debts. I worked with the churches on this brief via the Jerusalem Interchurch Committee that I ran then, and the municipal order failed due to a joint pushback by all the churches, alongside support and solidarity from a universal Christian fellowship. However, as Setrak Balyan, one of the key activists of this community in Jerusalem, mentioned in a recent ASQ thread on X, the debt that the Israeli municipality is demanding from the Armenian Church is legally disputable, and the claims are exaggerated and inconsistent since a significant portion of the alleged debt that is linked to properties that should not be taxed under historical exemptions, or are in fact leased to the municipality itself. Mr. Balyan also pointed out, quite rightly in my opinion, that paying up this amount would legitimize the wrongful taxation of all churches in Jerusalem, potentially opening the door for further financial and legal attacks against Christian institutions in the Holy Land. From the Oslo-led Camp David to a lease meant to take away 25% of the Armenian quarter, to this latest warning by the municipality for the foreclosure of debts. I want to spare you further tawdry details in this very short episode. You can watch my previous episodes via my Epictasis website. But it is important to ask, what do these measures aim to achieve? In my opinion, there are intra-Armenian, intra-Christian, and also inter-Palestinian aims. Let me begin with Armenians. The latest episode, in my opinion, is also tantamount to pressure being applied by Israel via its Jerusalem municipality to coerce the Armenian church and community into agreeing to the 99-year lease that would amputate a large part of the Armenian community from their holdings. The trade-off seems easy on paper. Agree to give away 25% of the Armenian quarter that was erroneously agreed to in a lease by the church leadership, and we'll drop the order for a foreclosure of debts. We lawyers describe this as an apple and orange scenario. Conversely, be stubborn and continue with your legal and political maneuvers, and we'll ruin you by implementing this order. A difficult choice, a Hobson's choice almost, but as informed commentators know, there are historical legal agreements that protect these churches from such dubious claims. Let me remind you that in 1878, the status quo agreement was internationally recognized in the Treaty of Berlin, which was signed between the European powers and the Ottoman Empire following the conclusion of the Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878. Use your search engine and have a look at Article 62 for starters. Every power that has ruled Palestine since then has adhered to the provisions of this treaty, and it is not up to Israel to rip it up because it doesn't suit its mono-ethnic proclivities. And now, what about the Christian churches? Assume that the Armenians knuckle under this pressure and manage somehow to pay this sum by installments or crowdfunding or help from major donors. The other churches will be subjected to the same treatment. So this is not merely an Armenian issue, it is ecumenical, and all 13 churches in Jerusalem should be keenly aware of it. Finally, politically, Armenians should be clear that their cultural identity and their political future lie with the other Christian communities, and therefore with Palestinians. Any deals concluded with Israel that would ignore the interests of the other Christian communities or the heritage of the old city would end up with Armenians landing with egg on their faces. What a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. This aphorism was coined by Sir Walter Scott in the early 19th century. It suggests that when people begin to lie or deceive, they create a complex and complicated situation, much like a tangled web. The more they deceive, the more entangled they become in their lies, making it increasingly difficult to maintain the deception and often leading to unintended consequences. If I've learned anything at all in my professional life, first as a lawyer, then as a second-track political negotiator, and also as ecumenical facilitator with the churches, it is that our actions often come home to roost. So today, I hope, I really do, that savvy Armenians are alert to the dangers ahead and will act accordingly, and that other Christians will walk the talk with them too. As a teenage American poet, Matty Stepanek once said, wisely for his very young years, where there is unity, there is strength. Indeed.